President Putin and I have been discussing various things, and I think it's going very well. We've had some very, very good talks.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. I'm Jonathan Capehart in for Joy Reid. In just a few hours, Donald Trump heads back to Washington after embarking on his second ever trip abroad as president. And while he's having a busy day meeting with a number of G20 world leaders, or leaving his daughter Ivanka to do it, everyone here at home is talking about this: Trump's face-to-face with Russian President Vladimir Putin. It was a meeting that lasted more than 2 hours with only 6 people in the room: Trump, Putin, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and their translators. Quick, what's Russian for let bygones be bygones? Because while Tillerson was quick to tout progress on Syria, Ukraine, and even cybersecurity, when it came to Russian interference in the 2016 election, a foreign power potentially hacking our democracy, it was time to move on.
What the two presidents, I think rightly, focused on is how do we move forward? How do we move forward from here? Because it's not clear to me that we will ever come to some agreed upon resolution of that question between the two nations. So the question is, what do we do now? And I think the relationship, and the president made this clear as well, is too important.
Joining me now, Malcolm Nance, author of the book The Plot to Hack America, Bianna Golodryga, anchor at Yahoo News, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Russian opposition activist and vice chairman of the pro-democracy movement Open Russia, Karen Attiah, global opinions editor at The Washington Post, and Jamie Fly, foreign policy advisor to Marco Rubio. Thank you all for being here. Hey, Malcolm, how do you say let bygones be bygones in Russian?
Not in any way that I'm going to say on television, but it must be good morning, Vladimir. How are you?
Right. Well, you know, let's really start the conversation here with the dueling interpretations of what happened in that meeting. Here you have Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on what happened at the meeting.
President Trump has said that this campaign is becoming rather strange and bizarre. Trump has said that he has heard clear declarations from Mr. Putin that Russian leadership and Russian government has not interfered in the elections, and he accepts these the things that Mr. Putin has said.
And now here is Tillerson's account of what happened in terms of being asked about the Russian hacking of the election.
Mr. Secretary, can you say if the president was unequivocal in his view that Russia did interfere in the election? Did he offer to produce any evidence or to convince Mr. Putin?
The Russians have asked for proof and evidence. I'll leave that to the intelligence community to address the answer to that question. And again, I think the president at this point, he pressed him, and then felt like at this point let's talk about how do we go forward.
Okay, Bianna, we've now heard these two clips. The Russian Foreign Minister, the American Secretary of State. Am I wrong, maybe even unpatriotic, in giving more credence to the Russian Foreign Minister and his readout of the meeting than I do the American Secretary of State?
Look, I wouldn't trust Sergei Lavrov as far as I could throw him, but given what the President of the United States has said in the past, just the day before going into this meeting about his own intelligence agency's conclusions about Russian interference, one has to wonder why Tillerson, if it did not play out the way Lavrov says it did, didn't come out and defiantly say, no, that's not what took place. You know, we had a disagreement. The president said, stop doing this, stop interfering in our elections, and you clearly had a role in our elections and in hacking into our elections. That's not what took place. So it's a matter of whether President Trump came in and said, listen, I've got to address this issue, or is it a matter of whether he said, I don't believe you and we've got to stop it from going forward?
Malcolm, is it how surprising is it to you, given your experience with Russia, your experience in the intelligence community, that the American president and the American Secretary of State seemingly have not pushed this issue as hard as I, as an American citizen, think that should be pushed?
Well, let's talk from an intelligence perspective, because Bianna can handle the Russian side for sure. You know, President Trump views any questioning of the elections, the hacking, all of this information as a referendum, so to speak, on his election. And he will not hear from anyone that will say anything to the contrary. The entire U.S. intelligence community discounts it to the point where he insults it in front of our allies overseas. So to a certain extent, as a citizen, you have to make a determination of who's more trustworthy here. Is it going to be your intelligence agencies that keep you safe in your beds day and night, or is it going to be someone who is known to go up and, you know, obfuscate at a minimum, or in this case, he may in fact have just put the Secretary of State out to give an opinion that is patently false, and the Russians, who are ready to manipulate this at every turn, decided putting out the truth would be more credible than the President of the United States.
You know, Vladimir, how troubling is it to you, as someone who runs a pro-democracy movement and group, that the American president seems to really want to cozy up and have a fantastic relationship with the Russian president?
Well, of course, in a way, there's nothing new in this. If you recall, you know, the two previous U.S. presidents, their first meetings with either Mr. Putin himself or his temporary placeholder, Dmitry Medvedev, also defined in many ways and set the tone for their attempts to try to achieve friendly and accommodating relations with the Putin regime. We remember President Bush famously or infamously looking into Mr. Putin's eyes and seeing his soul. We remember President Obama declaring a reset in relations with the Putin regime. So this, you know, in a way, this follows a long-established pattern. And I think, you know, of course, if we look back at the previous U.S. administrations, those attempts to be friendly with Mr. Putin didn't end very well, and they could not have ended otherwise, because at the end of the day, they cannot be a convergence of interests or even, you know, a relationship based on mutual understanding and trust between, on the one hand, a democratic system, and on the other hand, an autocratic, authoritarian, unelected kleptocracy that is the regime of Vladimir Putin. And I think those lessons really need to be learned. And another very important aspect of this is that, you know, this was not just a meeting of two individuals. This was a meeting of two world leaders with a very different status. And I'm not talking about geopolitics. I'm talking again about the fact that one of them, you know, whatever your attitude to him, is a democratically elected head of state in a democratic constitutional system of government with checks and balances. And the other one is an unelected authoritarian kleptocratic leader. And if the U.S. And if the U.S. administration wants to have a genuinely cooperative relationship, long-term relationship with Russia, it is very important not only to talk to Mr. Putin and his regime, but also to talk to other people, other voices in Russian society, in Russian civil society, representative of other political views in Russia, because Mr. Putin is not the duly elected, legitimate democratic leader of the Russian people. I think the mass protests that we all saw across Russia just a few weeks ago, when tens of thousands of people went out to the streets to protest this regime, were a good reminder of that.
You know, and Vladimir, I take your point. I mean, every American president has always come into office hoping to have better relations with Russia, only to be disappointed years down the road. But I would argue that those other presidents still had a sort of had a jaundiced view of Russia as a whole. But Jamie, let me come to you. And part of the reason why I'm so troubled by what we saw at the G20 is the past statements by President Trump, either as a candidate and certainly as president, about Vladimir Putin. Let's take a listen.
Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. You got a lot of killers. Why you think our country's so innocent? If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him. I've already said he is really very much of a leader.
She goes, Donald Trump, think of it, wants to befriend Putin and other things, she said, right? And I'm saying to myself, what's wrong with that?
I mean, Jamie, sure, what's wrong with that, trying to have good relations with an adversary of the United States, except the President of the United States doesn't seem to look at Vladimir Putin or Russia as an adversary.
No, I think that's one very disturbing element of the meeting yesterday, and I think Vladimir hit the nail on the head. I mean, this administration is repeating the mistakes of the past. In this case, though, President Trump also doesn't seem to understand that the regime of Vladimir Putin is not an ally of the United States. He seems to believe that there are issues like terrorism, countering terrorism, that we can cooperate with this regime on. And I think, unfortunately, that this administration is going to find at the end of the day that they're going to be left holding the bag when the Russians fail to deliver, whether it's in Syria, where we don't share the same interests as them in terms of resolving that conflict, or whether it's actually shoring up our democracy and preventing them from meddling in the future, which is the real thing that's missed in all the theatrics and all the drama about how the meeting actually went. You know, the president can quibble about the intelligence, but the fact of the matter is they're going to come back again. The Russians are continuing to try to influence our democracy. And as we here in the U.S. are all distracted, arguing as Republicans and Democrats with each other, the Russians continue to sow discord, and that's the thing that's most frightening to me.
Right, and you know, one of the, Karen, you know, in the run-up to the G20, there's all this talk about how is President Trump going to be prepared? How is he going to be briefed? How is he going to be ready to go up against someone like Vladimir Putin, who is a former KGB agent deep in the Russian intel community, longtime leader of Russia? And one of the articles that, about the prep pointed this out. It says, the president often doesn't read the usual briefing books and relies on in-person briefings, the official said. So aides also have written a list of tweet-length sentences that summarize the main points Trump could bring up with Putin. This is from the Los Angeles Times. Tweet-length sentences for the president to absorb and understand a relationship as complicated, nuanced, and what's the word I'm looking for? Problematic as that between the United States and Russia.
Right, and I think that is disturbing, to say the least, when it comes to anybody who cares about the U.S.'s preparedness to go up against an adversary like Russia. Even ahead of this meeting, H.R. McMaster said that there wasn't a specific agenda for this meeting, and that, you know, we were just going to kind of come in and discuss whatever is on the president's mind. And I think, you know, that also our allies and our adversaries, again, are looking at that and looking to see, is this really a president that is able and willing to communicate the interests of the American people to our allies and our adversaries? And again, we're talking so much about Trump-Putin and so much about the personalities, I think, that are involved with this meeting. I mean, this was the main card fight. This was the title matchup of the G20. But I think what's lost in all of this is what are American interests, and the president's job when we send him abroad, he is serving the interests of the American people, not just those who voted for him, but all of Americans. Right. So was he able to articulate our interests? Right.
And since Karen talked about personalities, and she mentioned H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, not in that meeting, Bianna Malcolm. Another person who not only wasn't at the meeting, but wasn't even brought on the trip, Fiona Hill. She is I don't have her title in front of me. Malcolm, if you know about Fiona Hill, she's, I believe, the Deputy National Security Advisor in charge of Europe and Russia.
Right. Very hawkish against Russia.
Against Russia.
Well, right, and very fluent in Russian.
Go ahead, Bianna.
Well, no, she was not in the room. I mean, in one cynical sense, you could say H.R. McMaster did himself a favor by not being there, because to have to come out and have to spin some sort of narrative about how this went down and in support of the president. I think, look, Vladimir Putin, in a sense, gave the president an out, because if he doesn't want to talk about the past, if he doesn't want to talk about the election and what role Russia may have played in his winning the election, all that he has to do is focus on the future and what is Russia doing now. He has his own intelligence heads now running these agencies that are constantly telling him, yes, Russia meddled, yes, Russia's continuing to meddle. We've got an election in 2018, an election in 2020, reports about Russians attacking or snooping around nuclear facilities here in the U.S. There's a lot to focus on going forward that Russia is currently involved in. So don't focus on the past if you don't want to, but continue to hound Russia and really be tough on them about going forward and the role Russia continues to play and is currently playing in interfering in our system.
Malcolm?
Yeah, you know, for the last day I've been calling what happened in that meeting Russian information dominance operation. They have controlled the narrative of what happened in that room. Even when Tillerson came out, he came off as not telling the truth. But you have to understand something. Trump himself has isolated himself from every aspect of U.S. information sharing that is legitimate. And he has decided that, tweet length, descriptions of what he thinks is foreign policy is now the way that he is going to get information. Russia does not think like that. Vladimir Putin is an intelligence chief, and he uses all the aspects of Russian intelligence power to gain information dominance over Trump. But to a certain extent, you could also say that, Vladimir Putin used his rewards points in this meeting to gain traction on issues that now will reward Moscow in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that the intelligence collection facilities given back to Russia and Russian sanctions lifted as a reward for this great meeting.
Yeah, minus lifting sanctions and giving the compounds back, this was a definite win for Vladimir Putin. They walked out of this meeting agreeing not to interfere in each other's domestic programs. They also walked out of this meeting saying that they were going to set up a joint cyber task force. I mean, the hypocrisy
with O.J.
there
Simpson
as
as
Russia
the head.
continues.
and with that, we're going to have, there's so much to talk about with this, we're going to have to leave it here for now. Malcolm and Bianna will be back later in the show. Thank you so much to Vladimir Kara-Murza, Karen Attiah, and Jamie Fly. Thank you, guys.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.